Sophia Martinez stood frozen in the living room of her upscale Manhattan apartment, her 6-month pregnant belly pressed against a mahogany table. The soft glow of the Christmas tree lights blinked mockingly in the corner, casting an unsettling calm over the room. Beside her, the faint crackle of the fireplace did little to drown out the icy tension filling the air. Her husband, Daniel Cooper, sat across from her with a manila envelope on the table. His face, once filled with warmth and affection, was now cold and unreadable. Behind him, Vanessa Chun, his secretary and longtime mistress, lounged on a leather sofa, her own round belly on full display. Patricia Cooper, Daniel's mother, sat off to the side, sipping champagne as if she were a spectator at a play. She smiled with cold satisfaction, watching the scene unfold. Sophia's hands trembled as she reached for the envelope. She could feel the weight of the moment, her stomach tightening in fear. Her mind raced, but her body couldn't react fast enough. Divorce papers. She scanned the document in disbelief. It was happening. Patricia's voice pierced through the silence like a knife. "Sign them, Sophia," she said, her tone sharp as broken glass. "You've been bleeding my son dry long enough, you little gold digger." Sophia looked up at Daniel, searching his face for some sign of the man she once knew, the man who had promised her the world. Instead, all she saw was contempt. "Daniel, please," Sophia whispered, her voice barely audible. "We're having a baby. Your baby." Daniel's jaw tightened, and he leaned forward, the venom in his voice unmistakable. "That baby was a mistake. Vanessa's child is what I want. She understands my world, my ambitions. You," he scoffed bitterly, "you're just a burden I can't afford anymore." His words landed on Sophia like a physical blow. It hurt in ways she couldn't put into words. How had she gone from being the woman he couldn't live without to being the woman he couldn't even stand? She had hidden so much from him. Her true identity, her family's wealth. When they had met at that coffee shop downtown, she had introduced herself as Sophia Martinez, a freelance graphic designer just trying to make it in the city. She had desperately wanted to be loved for herself, not for her father's billions. Victor Blackwood, her father and CEO of Blackwood Industries, had supported her decision, even though it broke his heart. He'd wanted nothing more than for her to have a normal life, a life outside the shadow of wealth. But Daniel hadn't cared about any of that. He hadn't cared that she was hiding who she really was, or that she was living in a small, modest apartment just to fit in with him. Patricia leaned in, her perfume suffocating. "My son's architecture firm failed because of you. 6 months of marriage, and everything fell apart." She gestured around the spacious brownstone. "We had to move into this rental just to stay afloat. And now you're pregnant, adding another mouth we can't feed." What Patricia didn't know was that this rental brownstone was owned by Blackwood Holdings. Sophia had quietly purchased it 6 months ago, using her family's real estate portfolio, when Daniel's business began crumbling. She had done it without him knowing, thinking she could save him. She had paid the utilities, covered the property taxes, and even arranged a mortgage. Daniel thought he was paying rent that was redirected into a trust for their unborn child. Patricia's eyes narrowed as she saw Sophia hesitate. "Sign the paper," Daniel repeated, his voice cold and final. "Vanessa's baby is due in 3 months. I want to marry her properly. Give my real child my name." Sophia's heart shattered into a million pieces. She looked down at her belly, at the life growing inside her, and her anger began to rise. How could Daniel be so blind? How could he discard his own flesh and blood for a woman who had never loved him the way Sophia had? With shaking hands, Sophia reached for the pen. As the ink scratched across the paper, the room fell silent. Patricia's smile widened, and Vanessa giggled from the sofa, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Daniel's shoulders relaxed as if a weight had been lifted from him. Sophia stood up slowly, the weight of what had just happened crashing down on her. She reached into her purse, pulled out her phone, and dialed a number she never thought she would have to call. Not like this. Not for this. Dad, she said quietly, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. I need you. Please come to the Cooper brownstone. Bring Marcus and the legal team. She paused, her gaze locking with Daniel's. It's time they knew the truth. 45 minutes later, the sound of black SUVs pulling up outside signaled a dramatic shift. Sophia sat on the bottom step of the staircase, her hands folded protectively over her belly, as the Cooper family's confusion turned to alarm. Car doors opened in synchronized precision, and Victor Blackwood emerged first. Silver-haired, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, his presence was commanding. Behind him came Marcus Chun, the family's chief legal counsel, holding a leather briefcase, followed by 6 security personnel. The room fell silent, and Daniel's face drained of color. The truth was about to be revealed. The first black SUV stopped outside the brownstone, without ceremony. Sophia felt it more than she heard it. Her hand rested on her belly, instinctive and protective, as the room shifted from arrogance to uncertainty. Daniel stood frozen near the table. Divorce papers still spread like proof of ownership. Patricia moved toward the window, her champagne glass trembling slightly. "Did you call someone?" she asked Daniel. He didn't answer. He was staring at Sophia now, really staring, as if trying to read something he had missed for 2 years. The front door opened, not slammed, not forced, opened. A tall, silver-haired man stepped inside, dressed in a charcoal suit that didn't announce wealth. It assumed authority. Behind him came a lawyer carrying a leather briefcase, followed by quiet, disciplined security. Sophia exhaled for the first time that night. Dad. Victor Blackwood crossed the room and knelt in front of her without hesitation, ignoring everyone else. "Are you hurt?" he asked softly. She shook her head. "The baby's fine." Only then did he stand. "My name is Victor Blackwood," he said calmly, "and this woman you just humiliated is my daughter." Patricia laughed once, sharp, disbelieving. "That's ridiculous." Victor's gaze cut to her. She stopped breathing. "Sophia Blackwood," he continued, "sole heir to Blackwood Industries." The room collapsed inward. The champagne glass slipped from Patricia's hand and shattered. Vanessa's face drained of color. Gregory lowered himself back into his chair like his legs had given out. Daniel stared at Sophia as if the floor had disappeared beneath him. "That's impossible," he whispered. "She said she was a designer. She rides a subway." "She chose that life," Victor replied, "because she wanted to be loved without leverage." The lawyer stepped forward. "6 months ago," he said, opening the briefcase, "your failing firm received a $75,000 investment. That came from Sophia." Daniel's mouth opened. No sound came out. "The payroll you couldn't meet?" the lawyer continued. "Also Sophia." Patricia's breathing turned shallow. "And this brownstone you believe you rent?" He paused. "Owned by Blackwood Holdings." Silence pressed against the walls. Victor spoke again, his voice even. "My daughter signed your divorce papers tonight, so now we proceed." He nodded once. "The investment is recalled with penalty. You owe $210,000. Daniel staggered backward. "Mrs. Cooper," Victor said, turning to Patricia, "your hospital board seat was secured through a Blackwood endowment. It's gone." Patricia collapsed onto the sofa. "And this property," the lawyer added, "will be vacated in 30 days. Daniel turned desperately to Sophia. "I didn't know you were rich." She stepped forward slowly. "That's not the defense you think it is," she said quietly. "It means you only valued me when you thought I had nothing. Vanessa stood abruptly, grabbing her purse. "I'm leaving," she snapped. "This is over." She didn't look back. The door slammed. Daniel stood alone, stripped of certainty, status, and allies. Victor placed a hand on Sophia's shoulder. "Get what you need," he said. "We're going home." Sophia glanced once at the Christmas tree, the light still blinking, pretending nothing had changed. Then she turned away and walked out. Sophia didn't look back as she stepped into the cold Manhattan night. The black SUVs waited quietly at the curb, engines humming low, patient. Snow drifted down in thin, lazy flakes, catching in her hair and melting against her coat. Christmas music from a nearby apartment floated faintly through the air, cheerful and unaware. Victor opened the door himself. Sophia paused before getting in, not because she was unsure, but because her body was finally catching up to what had just happened. Her hand was shaking, not from fear, from release. Inside the vehicle, the warmth wrapped around her like permission to breathe. She lowered herself carefully onto the seat, one hand on her belly, the other gripping the edge of the door until Victor gently closed it for her. The SUV pulled away. Behind them, the brownstone stood silent, its windows glowing like nothing inside had fractured. No one spoke for a full block. That silence mattered. It let the rage drain instead of explode. Victor finally broke it, quietly. "You don't have to say anything yet." Sophia nodded. Her eyes stayed on the passing streets. Storefronts closed for the holiday. Couples hurrying along sidewalks. A man carrying a small pine tree over his shoulder. Normal life. Life that kept moving even when yours shattered. "I didn't call you to punish them," she said after a moment. "I just couldn't stay there." Victor didn't argue. He understood the difference. "You protected yourself," he said. "And your daughter." That word, daughter, tightened something in Sophia's chest. A memory slipped in without warning. A small ultrasound room. Dim lights. A technician smiling softly as she turned the screen. "There she is," the woman had said. Daniel had been late that day. Again. Sophia had watched the flicker of a tiny heartbeat alone and told herself it didn't matter. That love didn't need witnesses. She understood now that loneliness doesn't arrive all at once. It leaks in slowly. The SUV turned onto Fifth Avenue, lights reflecting off polished pavement. Sophia shifted slightly, discomfort settling in her lower back. Victor noticed immediately. "Are you okay?" "Just tired," she said. "And done." Victor smiled faintly. Those are compatible states. They drove in silence again, this time gentler. When they reached the penthouse, security moved quickly but discreetly. No announcements, no spectacle, just doors opening and closing, like the world had decided to cooperate. Inside, the apartment was calm, warm, neutral colors, clean lines, the kind of space designed to absorb impact instead of amplify it. Sophia stepped inside and felt something loosen in her chest. Safety. She slipped off her coat, lowering herself onto the sofa with a controlled exhale. Her body finally allowed exhaustion to surface now that it knew it wasn't being watched. Victor stood nearby, giving her space. "You can stay as long as you want," he said. "No timelines, no expectations." Sophia nodded. Down the hallway, a guest room waited, already prepared. Fresh sheets, a lamp left on low, a glass of water on the nightstand, like someone had anticipated exactly how she would feel. She stood slowly, hand braced on the armrest. As she walked toward the room, another memory surfaced, quieter than the rest. A night weeks ago, Daniel sitting on the edge of the bed, scrolling through his phone while she rubbed her stomach. "Did you feel that?" she'd asked softly. She kicked. Daniel hadn't looked up. Later, "Okay, I'm busy." Sophia had smiled anyway. She didn't smile at the memory now. In the guest room, she changed carefully, moving like every motion had weight. She lay down on her side, pillow tucked behind her back, hands folded over her belly. For the first time in months, she cried. Not loud, not dramatically, just steady tears that came from a place deeper than anger. Grief for the man she thought Daniel was. Grief for the future she had imagined. Grief for how long she had tried to be small to be loved. Her breathing slowed eventually. The city hummed outside the window. She slept. 3 weeks passed. Not loudly, not dramatically. They passed the way healing often does. Quietly, unevenly, without permission. Sophia didn't watch the fallout. She didn't ask about Daniel. She didn't track what Patricia said or where Vanessa went. That wasn't restraint. That was regulation. Instead, she focused on smaller things. Prenatal appointments where the nurse smiled and asked if she had support. Morning walks in the park, bundled in a long coat. Snow crunching underfoot. Meals that stayed down. Sleep that came without dread. Victor never pushed. But one afternoon, as Sophia sat by the window with a cup of tea, he spoke. Marcus called, he said. Sophia didn't tense. That mattered. He wanted to know if he'd like updates. She shook her head. Not yet. Victor nodded. All right. Then he added gently, Daniel has been calling the office. That did something. Not anger. A dull pressure behind her ribs. What does he want? She asked. He wants to see you, Victor said. And the baby. Sophia closed her eyes. A flash of the living room returned. The papers, the laughter, the word mistake. Her hand moved instinctively to her belly. No, she said quietly. Not now. Victor didn't argue. You're allowed to choose peace, he said. That night, Sophia stood in the nursery they'd begun preparing. Cream-colored walls. A rocking chair by the window. Shelves still empty, waiting. She rested a hand on the crib rail and imagined a small body there. A small life that would never need to prove its worth to be loved. That thought steadied her. This wasn't revenge. This was boundary. And boundaries are how cycles end. Sophia turned off the light and closed the door gently behind her. Daniel Cooper learned very quickly that collapse doesn't feel dramatic. It feels quiet. The first sign wasn't losing the brownstone. It was waking up the next morning and realizing no one was calling him back. No messages from clients. No panicked emails asking for reassurance. No assistants checking schedules. Just silence. He sat at the small kitchen table of the brownstone, his brownstone for now, staring at his phone like it had betrayed him personally. The same phone that used to buzz constantly now lay still, dark, indifferent. Patricia paced the living room in a robe that no longer felt luxurious without an audience. This is temporary, she insisted, voice brittle. These people don't just destroy families overnight. We have connections. Gregory didn't answer. He sat in the armchair, staring at the floor, doing something he hadn't done in years. Thinking. Daniel finally checked his email. One subject line stood out. Notice of termination. Then another. Contract void, immediate effect. Then another. His stomach dropped. He scrolled faster, panic replacing denial. The consulting firm that had promised him referrals, gone. The vendor who had extended credit, rescinded. The landlord who had flexibility, unavailable. Daniel stood abruptly, knocking the chair backward. This doesn't make sense, he muttered. They can't just erase everything. Patricia stopped pacing. Call someone, she snapped. Call anyone. He did. The calls went to voicemail. When someone finally answered, the tone was polite, professional, final. I'm sorry, Daniel, the man said. We've been advised not to continue. Advised by who? Daniel demanded. There was a pause. I think you know. That was the moment Daniel understood something he'd never understood before. Power doesn't yell. Power doesn't threaten. Power withdraws. By the end of the week, the brownstone felt smaller. Not physically, but emotionally. The walls echoed. The air felt heavy. Every room reminded Daniel of something he'd assumed would always be his. Patricia's breakdown followed a different timeline. At first, she raged. She called board members she had once controlled with charm and obligation. She left messages full of indignation and disbelief. None were returned. She attended a luncheon anyway, convinced presence would restore relevance. It didn't. The smiles were thinner. Conversations ended sooner. Invitations dried up in real time. When someone asked her what she'd been doing lately, she had no answer that impressed anyone. That night, she cried. Not for Daniel's marriage, not for the baby she dismissed, but for the loss of something far more important to her. Visibility. Gregory's fall was quieter. He accepted a job managing inventory at a hardware store in Queens. The uniform didn't fit quite right. The name tag felt heavier than it should have. No one recognized him. For the first time in decades, he existed without deference. He didn't complain. He just went home and slept. Daniel lasted the longest in denial. He believed, truly, that if he could just speak to Sophia, everything would recalibrate. That once she understood, he hadn't known, she'd soften. He wrote emails. He apologized. He explained. He used the same words he'd once used to charm investors and mentors. None of it worked. When the architecture firm officially declared bankruptcy, the illusion shattered. Daniel stood in line at an electronics store 2 weeks later, filling out paperwork for a retail position. His hands shook as he wrote his name. Education, incomplete. Experience, irrelevant. References, unavailable. The manager barely looked up. You start Monday, the man said. 15 an hour. Daniel nodded. He needed the money. That night, he sat alone in a small rented room, scrolling through photos on his phone. Sophia laughing in Central Park. Sophia asleep on the couch with a book on her chest. Sophia holding a positive pregnancy test. Eyes wide, hopeful. A flashback hit him hard. Christmas night. Her standing there, pregnant, signing papers while he felt relieved. He hadn't felt powerful then. He had felt unburdened. Now he understood the difference. Power leaves you intact. Cruelty empties you. Sophia didn't witness any of this. And that was intentional. Her days were structured around something else entirely. Health, stability, preparation. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Her doctor smiled at every visit. The baby kicked stronger now, more frequently, as if asserting presence. Sophia welcomed it. She walked through the city with a different posture now. Slower, grounded, aware. One afternoon, she sat in a quiet cafe overlooking Washington Square Park. She watched parents push strollers, couples argue softly, friends laugh over coffee. Life unfolded. No one knew who she was. And for once, she didn't need them to. A memory surfaced, one she hadn't revisited in weeks. Daniel standing over her with the papers. You're a burden I can't afford anymore. Sophia inhaled, then exhaled. That sentence no longer cut. It revealed. Later that evening, Victor joined her in the living room. There's been movement, he said gently. Sophia didn't look up from the book in her hands. You don't have to tell me. I know, Victor said, but I want you to know you're not avoiding reality. You're choosing timing. She nodded. Daniel wants access, Victor continued. Legally, he signed away. Morally, he paused. That's your call. Sophia closed the book. She thought of her daughter, of what it would mean to grow up knowing her worth wasn't conditional. "Not yet," she said. Victor accepted that without question. Later that night, Sophia stood in the nursery again. This time, she placed a folded blanket into the crib. It was small, pink, soft. She pressed it gently, smoothing it down, and felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Not triumph, not revenge, certainty. Some endings don't roar. They resolve. Sophia turned off the light and rested her hand over her stomach. "We're okay," she whispered. And for the first time since Christmas, she believed it. She went into labor just before dawn, not the dramatic kind. No rushing, no shouting, just a deep, steady pressure that woke Sophia from sleep and told her, without urgency but without doubt, that the waiting was over. Victor was already awake when she stepped into the hallway, one hand braced against the wall, the other on her stomach. "It's time," she said. He didn't panic. He didn't rush. He nodded once, like a man who had been preparing for this exact moment in 100 quiet ways. At the hospital, the lights were soft and efficient. Nurses moved with calm authority. Sophia focused on breathing, on staying present, on not letting her mind drift back to a living room she had already left behind. 14 hours later, exhausted and trembling, she felt the weight of her daughter placed into her arms. Grace, small, warm, real. Sophia cried then, not from pain, not from relief, but from recognition. This was the love she had been searching for, the kind that didn't bargain, the kind that didn't measure. Victor stood beside her, eyes shining, hand resting gently on the edge of the bed as if touching too much might break the moment. "She's beautiful," he said. Sophia nodded, unable to speak. Grace had Daniel's dark hair and her own eyes. That detail didn't hurt the way Sophia thought it would. It simply existed. Some truths don't wound once they're accepted. The weeks that followed moved slowly, carefully. Grace slept in short stretches. Sophia learned the language of small cries, the rhythm of feedings, the quiet miracle of a baby falling asleep against her chest. The penthouse became something else entirely, not a symbol of wealth, but a shelter, a place where nothing had to be proven. Sophia didn't watch the news. She didn't follow gossip. She let the world shrink to the size of a crib and a rocking chair and the steady sound of breathing. But consequences don't stop just because you aren't watching them. One afternoon, Marcus visited. He didn't bring drama, just information. Daniel had written letters, not emails. Letters, pages of apology, pages of regret, pages filled with words that arrived far too late to matter. Sophia listened without interrupting, Grace asleep in her arms. "What does he want?" she asked quietly. "To meet her," Marcus said, "to be part of her life." Sophia looked down at her daughter's face, relaxed and unguarded. A flashback surfaced, not sharp, but clear. Daniel standing in the doorway months ago, coat on, phone in hand. "Why do you always need me?" he'd said, irritated. Sophia had laughed then, dismissing the sting. Now she understood. Need had never frightened him. Responsibility had. She looked back at Marcus. "No," she said. "Not harsh. Not emotional. Just final." Marcus nodded. "I'll relay that." That night, Sophia stood by the window as the city stretched out below her. Lights flickered. Cars moved. Life continued. Somewhere out there, Daniel was living the consequences of choices he'd made with confidence and cruelty. She didn't feel satisfaction. She felt distance. And distance was better. Weeks passed. Sophia returned to Blackwood Industries. Not to command, not to dominate, but to build something quieter. A foundation. Housing assistance. Job training. Child care for women who needed time to rebuild without being punished for surviving. She didn't announce it loudly. She didn't brand it with her pain. She just did the work. Every woman who walked through those doors carried a version of the same story. Dismissed, underestimated, reduced to what someone else decided they were worth. Sophia understood them without explanation. Daniel's letters continued to arrive. She placed them unopened into a small wooden box in her closet, not out of spite, out of patience. Some stories are not ready to be read yet. On Grace's 6-month birthday, Sophia rocked her gently in the nursery, sunlight spilling across the floor. She realized something then. She had stopped waiting. Waiting for another betrayal. Waiting for punishment. Waiting for the moment happiness would be taken away. It didn't come. Grace gurgled softly, fingers curling around Sophia's thumb. Sophia smiled. Some endings don't arrive with revenge. They arrive with peace. And peace, she had learned, was the most permanent victory of all. Sophia didn't mark the anniversary. She noticed it only because the city looked the same light spilling between buildings, the same rush of people moving forward without asking permission from the past. 1 year had passed since Christmas night, since the table, a pen, and a room full of certainty had tried to reduce her to something disposable. She was no longer waiting for anything to circle back. Grace sat on the floor of the living room, surrounded by soft blocks, focused with the seriousness only babies possess. Sophia watched from the couch, coffee cooling in her hands, the quiet way of stability settling into her bones. This was what safety looked like. Not celebration, not victory speeches, just the absence of fear. Victor entered the room quietly, watching his granddaughter stack a block, knock it over, and smile at the chaos she created. "She has your patience," he said. Sophia smiled. "And your timing." Grace babbled, oblivious of legacies, money, or mistakes. She had never known a home where voices were raised in cruelty. She had never watched someone be humiliated for entertainment. That mattered more than any inheritance Sophia could give her. Later that afternoon, a small envelope arrived. No return address. Sophia recognized the handwriting instantly. She didn't open it right away. She placed it on the counter and continued preparing dinner, moving slowly, deliberately. Grace watched from her high chair, fascinated by motion and sound. After Grace was asleep, Sophia finally sat at the table and opened the envelope. Inside was one letter. Not long, not dramatic. Daniel didn't beg this time. He wrote about working retail, about learning to stand for 8 hours without complaint, about how silence had taught him what power never had. He wrote that he understood now that love wasn't supposed to feel like leverage. Sophia read it once. Then she folded it carefully. She didn't cry. She didn't feel anger. She felt clarity. She placed a letter into the wooden box in her closet with the others and closed the lid. Some truths don't need responses. They just need to be acknowledged and left behind. Weeks later, Sophia stood in a conference room overlooking the city, speaking to a small group of women. No cameras, no press, just faces that needed to hear what came next. "You don't owe anyone access to you just because they regret losing you," she said calmly. "Healing isn't loud. It's consistent." The room was silent, not empty silence, but attentive silence. The kind that means something landed. That night, Sophia returned home to Grace, lifted her into her arms, and felt a familiar weight anchor her to the present. She thought briefly of the life she might have lived if she'd stayed silent, if she believed cruelty was normal, if she'd mistaken endurance for love. Then she looked at her daughter and understood something final. Cycles don't end with revenge. They end with refusal. Sophia rocked Grace gently, the city glowing beyond the windows, the past sealed where it belonged. Grace yawned, her tiny hand gripping Sophia's finger like it was the most important thing in the world. And in that moment, Sophia knew she hadn't won. She had moved on, and that was everything.